here to answer questions, give information, whatever you need to make an intelligent decision regarding the signing of petitions for moving forward with the Lake District. We're very fortunate this afternoon to have Eric Olson, who is from the University of Wisconsin Extension Stevens Point. Eric is a lake specialist. He does a lot in the way of working for the lakes, but one of his positions and responsibilities is to work with the lakes in developing lake districts, in supervising lake districts, answering questions. So he's our guru here to kind of go over why the state is doing lake districts, why they have done lake districts, etc., and to answer your specific questions and what other lake districts have done and why. And supporting him today is Mike Engelson, who is the executive director of Wisconsin Lakes. They are the representatives, they are the association that represents all Wisconsin lakes. They have an office in Madison, and they represent us advocating for legislation and other regulations regarding the lake. So both of them are here to answer questions on what other lakes are doing and why they're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, we'll turn it over to Eric. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Bill. And I do want to be able to mostly focus on whatever questions you might have. But I just want to briefly cover some of the history of lake districts in the state, because I'm probably one of the few people who kind of needs to be vested in understanding where this idea came from and why it works the way it does in Wisconsin. And so to get to the roots of this, I think you have to go back about 50 years ago when some folks in Madison at the university actually put together a proposal to research the lakes in the state of Wisconsin to try to understand what's really ailing these lakes, what can be done to rehabilitate these lakes. And in the case of a lot of lakes in the state, they're actually looking for ways that the lakes themselves could be used for economic development. That much of the northern Wisconsin regions, northwestern Wisconsin, was lacking in economic development and jobs. And so the theory was maybe the lakes and the tourism could be part of that. So they received a pretty hefty federal grant to research this project, or these problems. And they brought on board a PhD candidate who was basically studying social sciences. And his job was to go to lake association meetings all around the state and try and find out what exactly are these lake associations up to. What are their issues? What sort of problems do they have? And what role might lake associations play in managing lakes in the state of Wisconsin? For those who aren't familiar with the lakes in the state, there's thousands of them. There's really only a few thousand that are really big that you would recognize as a lake. This is why we don't really always go toe-to-toe with Minnesota over whether there's 13,000 lakes here and 10,000 lakes there. If you have the same definition, we do actually have fewer lakes than Minnesota. Those lakes, by the Constitution, basically belong to everybody. They're common property. They're a public trust. They're something that everybody in this room kind of co-owns. And what we've done over time is we've developed state agencies to basically take care of these lakes for us, to give them some responsibility, to say, well, I don't wake up in the morning wondering in Stevens Point if Beaver Dam Lake is taken care of. Instead, we want someone to try to help take care of that. So in the 1960s, they were trying to figure out, okay, well, with thousands of lakes, it's really hard to imagine. At that point, the DNR was just beginning to be created. The question was, well, could the DNR do all this work? Could they manage all these lakes? And Lowell Klesse was the name of the researcher. He was meeting with these lake associations. He said, these people are really great in terms of their interest in this lake. Most of them are riparian property owners, so they have like a direct, both sort of personal connection and a financial connection to the health of the lake. They can demonstrate actually that they've been involved in different projects. Even into the 1960s, people were doing aquatic plant harvesting or chemical treatment of different invasive species. And they were doing it usually through these lake associations. But he pointed out some of his findings were that lake associations also end up spending a lot of time and energy chasing after dollar bills to add to the kitty to take on the projects they want to take on. That they spend a large amount of time and energy into fundraising, which takes away from the time and energy that they could be spending towards just getting things done for the lake. So that was one of the findings. Another finding was that lake associations didn't always get the respect of the county government or of local governments in the area. The lake associations were seen as just sort of, and many of them were, sort of these informal clubs that would organize a 4th of July picnic and a parade of boats on the lake, and that was about it. So why would the town, the county care? So working with his advisors, Lowell said, you know what, we could use the statutes of the state of Wisconsin and some of the other local governments that we have. We could borrow from town government and from sanitary district government, and we could create a piece of statute that allows folks around the lake to form their own new local unit of government. We'll call that a public inland lake rehabilitation and protection district, or we usually just say a lake district. But to form a lake district, they have to demonstrate that there's interest among the property owners. They have to follow a certain procedure to form a district. And once they become a district, they're no longer a club. They're no longer a social organization that does just, kind of gatherings of the people on the lake, but instead they become a local unit of government, which means that they follow a lot of the same rules and regulations that apply to towns, school districts, and sanitary districts. That was their idea, their proposal, and they kind of put it to the legislature in the early 1970s, and the legislature looked at it and said, well, this is actually sounds like a good idea. Let's put this into law. So Lowell, in just a short amount of time, went from going to lake association meetings, diagnosing sort of what their issues were, coming up with a legislative proposal, and then getting that proposal passed into law. And suddenly, voila, there was the ability to form lake districts. After a couple of years working at Northland College, he actually came back to UW Extension, and he was hired to be the person to go around the state explaining the law to people like Beaver Dam Lake Association in terms of what do you need to do to follow the law, how do you comply. So he was probably the person best situated to explain this project that really he'd been involved in already for many, many years. Lowell carried on basically that work through the 1970s, the 80s, and into the early 1990s. He was doing what I'm doing today. In fact, I know that he came to Beaver Dam Lake a couple of times for a meeting similar to this, or for other meetings to talk about what's the Lake Association going to do and what are the local governments going to do. And he would take his notes and share them back. He was fortunate to hire my predecessor, Bob Korth, who also was given the same task. Go out and make sure people understand what goes on with lake districts. And Bob would drive all over the state as well. And then when he retired, I was able to apply for his position and I was hired. I'm doing the same thing. I go around doing what I'm doing today, answering questions about lake districts. Most of my time, though, is spent really on the phone or responding to email questions now that people have about Chapter 33, which is still the statute that was passed in 1974 to allow lake districts to be formed. Along that whole period of time, lake districts regularly were coming together and forming. In the 1970s, it was really driven by the fact that the state of Wisconsin said, through the DNR, okay, if you really want to get serious about taking care of lakes, the DNR will cost share projects with you. We'll go down this road together, holding hands, only if you form a lake district first. Okay, so they kind of put that out there and said, we're not going to work with lake associations, we're not going to work with clubs. We need to find a real lake district. And for the 1970s, that caused many groups to say, well, geez, if that's the only way we can get DNR help, then let's form a lake district. So it was sort of under that type of pressure, I think, that those districts formed. In the 1980s, the DNR's grant program changed to allow certain lake associations, we call them now qualified lake associations, to also participate in sort of the cost share programs. It's my understanding that you all have been participating in those programs for some years now as a qualified lake association. But still, people were forming lake districts. Okay, even though they no longer had to form a district just to get the grants, people kept forming lake districts. Such that today we now have, I believe the last count, do you remember, Mike, it was like 240?
242, I think.
242? 242 lake districts in the state of Wisconsin. They cover lakes from really small lakes to really large lakes. They're kind of all across the board. There's lakes in Walworth County and Racine County in southeast Wisconsin that have recently formed lake districts, and there's lakes way up in northwestern Wisconsin in Polk County that have formed lake districts. If I were to say the couple of reasons why districts are still forming today, one of them is kind of easy to understand, I think. There's a lot of lakes that are, their lake levels are controlled by a dam. And dams, as you all are probably quite aware, require maintenance and upkeep. They're depreciating assets. They're expensive to take care of. There's really a range of dam ownership around the state of Wisconsin. And wherever the lake was kind of threatened by whoever owned the dam no longer wants to spend money on the dam, the people around the lake said, well, I think we need to form a lake district so that we can actually take on the financial responsibility of that dam. So there's many examples of that around the state. The other real common denominator for new lake districts, roughly half, I think, of the recently formed districts, it's about aquatic plant management. It's about realizing that Eurasian water milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, other invasive species that really impede people's ability to enjoy the lake, those need to be kept in check. We can get good management plans out there, we can describe how you're gonna do it, but the folks who are part of like a lake association look around the room and say, well, why, maybe less than half of us are really chipping in to make this happen. How do we get everybody to chip in? Wouldn't a lake district be a good way to do that? And so they formulate an idea that, yes, we're gonna form a lake district mostly to take care of aquatic plants, but also probably to take care of water quality issues in the lake. And then using the lake district, we don't have to spend as much time doing the fundraisers. We can get right to the meat of the issues, whether it's bringing in contractors to work on plant issues or solving the problems with BMPs to do stormwater management. So those are the kind of basis for why we form lake districts. Nothing's really changed dramatically in those statutes since they were first written in 1974. There's always little tweaks and changes here and there. Our office creates a guide for groups that want to form lake districts to kind of walk them through the process and explain what Chapter 33 really means, because most of us don't read statutes very often. It's not a fun or easy thing to do. So this is sort of the interpretive guide to Chapter 33. And again, along that time too, Wisconsin Lakes is a nonprofit that can actually go and talk to lawmakers, has really been the vehicle for changing Chapter 33. Whenever the lake districts find, like the existing set of lake districts say, this isn't working for us, we need to tweak the statutes, they can't really talk to me about it, they can't really talk to the DNR about it, they need to talk to somebody who can talk to lawmakers and people who write legislation about it, and Wisconsin Lakes has really played that role for a long time. So again, my involvement here has been invited to talk about how these lake districts are formed, but I think most importantly to answer your questions. So unless Mike has anything quick to add, I'd open it right to the floor for your questions. Bill.
Talking with the different DNR folks and different grants we've applied for, there appears to be a bias for a district versus an association. Is there something documented that confirms that? That they have to put a ranking for a district higher than that of an association?
I'd say to some degree it depends on the project you're talking about. So let me give the example of the dam topics. I don't know when the last time you guys replaced the dam?
No, the dam is run by the city and we have.
Right, but has there been like a replacement?
2013?
Yeah.
Okay. So not too long ago. Does anyone have a ballpark on what that costs?
Oh, $500,000.
$500,000, okay. So the DNR actually has a grant program where they'll help offset the cost of fixing or repairing a dam. And they realize that this is a long-term capital endeavor. It's not a one-time like, oh, we fixed the dam, now we're never going to have to touch it again. When the DNR wants to work with groups on those really large, capital-intensive projects, they like to have some assurances that their partner, their local group, is really going to be there. That they're not going to sort of dissolve the next day and just sort of go away, that they're not a fly-by-night operation. Lake districts tend to be much more durable in the sense that they don't go away or fly by night. So when the DNR has to be, let's imagine a scenario where you have two lakes, each have dam issues, each is looking for help from the DNR. One has a lake association, one has a district. I think they're gonna lean towards giving them, if everything else was equal, well, why wouldn't we work with people at the district? They have a long-term funding mechanism in place. We know they can take care of this dam over time. That's gonna be the preference we give. I have heard similar cases where it has to do with sediment coming into a lake. It's a big enough project, it's expensive to go out and do sort of there's a way you can potentially get money to do what are called sediment traps. These are essentially holes that are excavated where a stream is coming into a lake to kind of slow down the amount of sediment that's filling in the lake. Same kind of situation. You don't put in a sediment trap and then say, oh, well, now it's all done. We just walk away from it. The DNR knows from history that a sediment trap will need maintenance. It may be 5 years, it may be 10 years, it may be 2 years, but somebody's going to go in and basically take that sediment out and reset the trap. If they think the lake association is going to be dependent on, whether or not they have a good walleye tournament or bake sale to see if they have the money to pay for that, there's not the security there that there is that says, no, this lake district will budget for it and plan for it, and the resources will be there when push comes to shove or when the need is there. So those are the cases that I've seen, but you won't find, I don't think, anything in writing. It really has to do with the support of your regional DNR biologist to say, does this group have the wherewithal to carry out the project that they've proposed? And if the project is not, just a 1 year, oh, we're gonna, have people at the boat landings asking people if they've pulled plants off, but it's more of no, this is a 5 or 10 year project to really turn around the lake or deal with aquatic plants or deal with the dam, they're gonna look for the stability and longevity of the organization. Good question.
It is nowhere in writing.
Right.
I know that, and when I talk to the DNR, they evaluate every organization before they give matching funds for anything. It's not just a lake district or a lake association, right?
Yep.
Everyone.
Just like I said, and you can understand what I'm saying, that they want to know, like, if this is a 5 year project, are you really going to be here in 5 years? Because they're committing state money to it.
Whether it's a lake district or it's an association, it's the same rules.
Same.
Don't change the rules for me.
You have a great article in Lake Tides about capacities.
Yeah.
And that discusses the capacity of associations and districts, and that's a good guideline right there.
Yeah. And I think, again, it gets at the notion of, you don't really raise money to raise money. Nobody's trying to say, well, let's, we want to fill this room with $100 bills. No. It's really about just getting the resources to carry out a project, whether it's aquatic plant harvesting or replacing the dam or dealing with sediment runoff coming into the lakes. Those are the projects. We got to figure out how to get them implemented. And if there's a dollar sign attached to that, then we got to figure out where that money's going to come from. My understanding from talking to Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that effort of going around and doing fundraisers and asking people to be sponsors and just raising money, that gets exhausting. So it kind of confirms what Lowell Classic found, I think, in the 1960s and 70s.
I would say that of our thousands of volunteer hours, half of them are spent raising money to try to do the projects that we're interested in doing instead of actually doing the projects,
Yeah.
as you mentioned.
So I'll make a comment on that too, that there's benefits to that in the sense that any nonprofit, like Wisconsin Lakes even, has to make sure that their donors understand what they're doing and that they agree with what they're doing, because that's why they keep writing a check, right? So that's why you're not too far off, because if you were, then suddenly no one would be giving you money. You'd be like, oh, I guess we're on the wrong highway here. So there was a concern, when you create a lake district, maybe it could also become detached. It becomes sort of, these people are aloof, they're no longer in touch with the property owners, they're just doing projects because, 3 people in a room think those are the good projects to do. So they built a mechanism into the Lake District law to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's the fact that at the annual meeting, the property owners in the Lake District and the residents of the district are the ones who approve the budget. So it's not just 3 people in a smoky room somewhere saying, yeah, this is what we're going to spend the money on, this is what we're going to do, but it's open to everybody to participate. And it's an annual basis. So every year, everybody gets to come back and say, hey, are we on the right path here? Are we on the right highway? And if they're not, the people at an annual meeting get to actually change the budget. They get to say, hey, I think we should spend less money on aquatic plants this year. Does everybody agree? If you get a majority of votes to edit the budget becomes edited, and then it becomes voted on. So that's pretty unique. That's following really the principle of town government that goes back to New England towns. That's what Lowell and the other folks really wanted to embody in Chapter 33.
And one of the things that you can enumerate on a little bit more, some people are concerned that and they'd like to know what other lake districts, how their fees are. Do they get up to the $400 or $500 within a couple of years and out of control, or are most lake districts in the $100 range or less?
Sure. I did do a little bit of digging just to get kind of some of those answers. What's hard to do is to find out exactly what the per property owner charge is, so it's easier to find out what's being raised at the Lake District level. So these are just numbers pulled from 2015, compiling all the different levies. In 2015, the median, so half of the districts were above, half the districts below, the median taxable income for a lake district was $12,500. That was the median. So there's some that are obviously higher, and there's a bunch that are lower. And the average across them, because, so there's two main ways you can raise money as a lake district. One is just using the same thing that the school district used, which is a property tax levy. It's based on the value of your property. You're capped out at 2.5 mils in the case of lake districts, but it's basically attached to the value of the property. The other way is through a fee. So it's a flat, per parcel fee. And those are also capped so that you can't exceed a certain amount collected. For those that use the levy, their average, this is not the median anymore, this is the average, was about $42,000. There was 129 lake districts using the levy, and their average was $42,000. For 69 lake districts using a fee, their average was $10,000 less than that. It was $32,000. So if you took an average lake and you said they collect somehow $32,000, most of these lakes don't just have 5 or 6 properties on them, they have hundreds of properties, so you kind of have to divide it out to get that. I did get some numbers from some specific lake districts then. One lake that's probably on the more expensive end of the range, Little St. Germain district is down near, Little St. Germain is actually up north, right? So they have a lake district. Their budget is about $250,000 because they're dealing with some pretty expensive aquatic plant harvesting projects. So they own and operate a plant harvester. I don't think you guys own a harvester. No. So they're taking care of the harvester. They're hiring people to staff the harvester. They're at that, like I said, that upper end. Their on-lake fees were $325 a year, and then if you were off-lake, it was $65 per year. They built into sort of their budgeting to say if you're off the lake, you're going to pay just a quarter of what the on-lake properties pay. So that's just one example. There's another North and South Twin Lakes, which is also up north in Vilas County, also dealing with milfoil. They levied about $60,000 a year, and what they've come up with is a way to say, if you're a residential property, you're going to pay one rate. They'll come up with that rate. And then if it's an unimproved property, so there's no house or structure on it, then you'll pay half of that rate. And if it's a commercial property, you'll pay 3 times what the residential rate is. Because up there, a commercial property is basically a resort. And the resorts, even though it's maybe one structure or one parcel, because of the level of usage that they have, there's boaters coming and going, lots of people coming and going, they figured they would modify it that way. Which is a good point to introduce the idea that the Lake District itself gets to figure out how they want to raise the money. I don't dictate it to them, the governor, the DNR doesn't dictate it. You all get to kind of figure out, are we going to do this based on a flat fee? If we want to just do $20 a parcel, then we'll just see how far that gets us, and that's how we raise our money. That's it's really a local
The
decision.
property owners could, or the commissioners along approval by the property owners could say that unimproved lots, in other words, that don't have a house on them or haven't been developed, would not get a fee or would get a lower fee.
Correct.
The district has that power to make that decision.
Yeah, there's some really high-level sidebars on that, which are things like the structure that you come up with has to make sense. It has to be defensible. There should be some connection between how you're doing it. So, like I just mentioned, in Vilas County, they said, well, the resorts actually generate a lot of traffic. That's why we charge them more. So there's some explanation behind it. If they flipped it around and said, well, unimproved properties are going to pay twice as much as an improved property, and people would say, well, what the heck is that about? Why would you charge an unimproved property more than one that has a house and a dock on it? So you have to just use your common sense. In the court, if it was ever challenged, you have to be able to explain how you came up with that.
Do most places just use the mill rate and just drop it at that because of all, because what you're talking about there, it's gotta be biased. I can see where it gets all screwed up.
It's unusual for a group to be like North and South Twin where they come up with a 3-tier system. It's much more common just to come up with a flat fee. And usually that flat fee is something like people are comfortable taking, if they say, well, the dues for the Lake Association used to be $40, they're like, oh, let's just make it $40 then. We know people are comfortable paying $40. It's not a huge amount on anybody's hide. Let's just make it $40. The thing with the levy, again, there's established law that says, yeah, levy makes sense. It's the reason why the school districts use the levy. The notion is that if you own a $2 billion house, you could probably afford to pay a lot of taxes on it. Whereas if you own a $60,000 house, you don't have the same spending power, so your taxes are related to the value of your real estate.
Do you have a breakdown of percentages of what districts use which of the 200 and some of the,
Well, like I said, so there's about 240 districts. Just over half of them use a levy, and only 69 of them use a fee. But I'd say of the districts that have formed most recently, which is my other list here, more of them are using the fee basis. So as time goes on, especially I think as they're thinking about the money is really going to be used just for aquatic plant management or for general lake improvements, then they like using the lake association basis, sort of everybody just pays a certain amount and then we're on with it to raise money. Questions in the back?
Like, is one of the goals of the Lake District to improve the quality of the water? Because like, we noticed from years of being at the lake, like it's much greener and a lot more weeds and things where it used to be clear you could swim in it, but now I would not want to swim in it. So is that a goal that they have to decide they want to do that, or?
My understanding is that you all have gotten some advice from both the DNR, from the university, from other organizations as to what's happening in your lake in terms of water quality and what might be done to your lake. Looks like Bill, you might have some comments about exactly what the plan looks like.
The 3-year planning portion is done. The 3-year plan will be completed December. And part of that is identify what the objectives will be. And one of those is water quality. But the primary is habitat. So you have better habitat, you create better water quality. And it's a circle, if you would. Habitat gets better water gets better habitat. So to reduce the amount of phosphorus into the lake is a key objective. And that requires a lot of attention and a lot of support, meaning that the residences, the farming around the community need to volunteer to take those efforts to fix their properties up.
Okay.
And the funding is there from the NRCS for farming, and funding from DNR is there once they understand that we're serious about making those incremental changes. It's not going to happen overnight.
Right.
It's going to happen piece by piece.
Yeah, and we've noticed too, people are throwing more plastic bottles, like they'll come up to the property, you know, and we can pick them out of the water where it just didn't have that.
And Bill mentioned phosphorus, and that's basically a nutrient, a chemical in the lakes that's going to make algae grow faster and more prosperous. we know across the state that there's phosphorus challenges. It's a nutrient that comes off of farmland, usually in spring runoff as well as big storm runoffs. You can't really see the phosphorus. It's usually bound to all the little particles that make the water not clear when it's coming into the lake. You're probably at a better position now of understanding, I think, the exact contours of the phosphorus challenge in Beaver Dam Lake. It's not something where it's like, oh, well, in 2 years, we'll have solved the phosphorus problem and the lake will be really clear. However, you're also at a point where if you sit back and do nothing, it's guaranteed not to get better. Right? There is nothing, the state of Wisconsin hasn't figured out like some really big regulatory regime to come in and say, well, we're gonna really just screw the clamps down on phosphorus in particular. The Clean Water Act at the federal level excludes farming as an activity that needs to be regulated under the Clean Water Act. So much of what's happening out there, it's not regulated. It's really about incentives, new ideas, demonstration projects, and trying to get some farmers to try different things out on their land that maybe they haven't tried before. And if they're taking a risk, if they're risking profit that year versus taking on like a no-till crop method of farming, they need something to sort of tip them in that direction. If doing what they've always been doing guarantees that they make a little money at the end of the year, they're going to keep doing what they've been doing. If someone wants to say, well, you could do something different, it might help the lake out, they're going to say, well, can you help prove it to me that this will work before I commit, the whole family farm on it. So I saw driving in, there are some more farms doing no-till, and I think your lake association and in the future the Lake District would continue to partner with certain farmers to promote these activities. But this is the type of, again, long-term endeavor that if you're going to attract not just DNR money, but maybe money from the federal government, maybe money from other big sources to kind of help out with your efforts, a potential funding source really is, you're part of the Rock River Basin, right?
Yeah.
So the whole basin has challenges in terms of nutrients. The DNR has been working with the EPA to come up with innovative ways that a downstream, let's call them a polluter, a wastewater treatment plant, for example, downstream, instead of spending millions of dollars upgrading their end-of-pipe system or the engineering to get phosphorus out of wastewater, instead of spending $1 million there to get a little bit of benefit, they can spend slightly less money up in the watershed, putting in place practices that get a bigger bang, reduce more phosphorus. And that's kind of it's an interesting idea. So think about downstream from you, the city of Madison spends millions of dollars every year treating wastewater. It would cost them millions of dollars to upgrade their plants. They might be able to actually send money up the watershed to pay for projects. They're probably going to look for partners, and they're going to look for partners that are maybe willing to kind of extend that money even further. If you can cost share and start piling money together, you can get a lot more done than when it's one entity doing it on its own.
That's working right now here in Dodge County. We have worked with the farmers called an area called Healthy Lakes, Healthy Water. And I think you're seeing a lot more cover crops. If you look in the last issue, not the current issue, but the one before that, you'll see where we're working with the farmers in developing cover crops, no-till. These are farmers that are currently doing good practices. And the farmers, to get farmers to change, number one thing is they listen to other farmers. They don't listen to the DNR or the UW Extension. They should, but farmers listen to other farmers. And this is why this program, I think, will be successful, because it's farmer to farmer, and they're proving already. We have farmers that have been doing it for 10 years, and they are showing that they're getting more productivity in their crops where they have cover crops than where they were doing tilling and etc. So we're getting there, but again, we have to be an advocate as a lake district or a lake association, but we can be a better advocate when we're a lake district. We'll have more time. Again, that time we have that spend money fundraising, I could be spending working with the Healthy Soils, Healthy Water. We have 2 districts in the area that are very active lake districts. Fox Lake and Lake Mississippi are both districts. They are putting money into seed and they're giving it to farmers where their water runs off into the lake, just to prove to them how how dedicated these lakes are to help improving themselves. So as Eric mentioned, we are making progress, but it's not gonna be turned around. But boy, that's gonna help that algae and lake quality. Number one thing all of our lake owners said when we did our management survey back in 2012 and 13, lake quality was the number one concern, and we're addressing that with other projects that Bill is working on. We're working up on Beaver Creek Stream. We could talk about an hour on that, how the projects that we're doing on that. So that we're making progress, but we need to take that next step so that we have a district so that we, as Eric mentioned, we're recognized by other governmental units, and we don't have to take all our time asking.
You have this deliberative process that, because everybody's dollars are on the line, there's a lot more interest in being part of that collaborative process, in that part of that deliberative process. And what we found, I think Eric would agree with this, is that the vast majority of groups that form lake districts don't end up spending all of their time fighting about the budget. They end up spending a lot of time working on how best to spend those funds that they raised and come up with really strong projects as a result.
Good point.
Any additional questions?
I have another advantage that I'll just mention that I run across a lot. I get a lot of questions from associations about hiring people if it's a complicated project that necessitates hiring a person, even if it's just a very basic project like a Clean Boats, Clean Waters program where you have people at boat landings talking to boaters about cleaning aquatic invasive species off their boats, and there's a need to actually hire some staff to do that in the summer, and you hire a high school or a college intern, something like that. It's much easier to do all that kind of stuff when you're a district, and you have much better liability protection as a district than you do as an association. It's not to say that nonprofits don't have fairly strong liability protection, because they do, but it's just a lot cleaner because you're a quasi-governmental agency as a district. And sometimes I think that point gets lost.
One other thing, Eric, that you can touch on too is in talking with our property owners around the lake, and I agree with them, we all pay a lot of taxes. We pay it to our townships, we pay it to our city, our county, our federal and state. And they say, I pay enough taxes, let's get some money out of where I'm already paying my taxes and not put another tax on me in addition to do that. And I say, you know, the best I can say is we do get some money from the state in the way of grants. So that is, there is some money coming back to us. But we can't do anything about going to a township or a city or a county even and saying, we need some money, will you do this or that? As a lake property owner, as you said, the state set it up as you're the lake property owners, it's your lake, manage it.
Yeah, it wasn't quite like that. I mean, it's a shared lake, right? So
Share.
if I equally own part of Beaver Dam Lake because I'm a Wisconsinite, right? Shouldn't I chip in to take care of it? And on some level I am, right? So the DNR, in addition to the grant program, they have a program for monitoring water quality, for doing that both through volunteers on lakes, but they also have staff that go around the whole state to do some water quality monitoring. They do have some sort of still remaining semblance of a regulatory program to make sure that people aren't doing stuff that really, really messes up the lake. Believe it or not, and you might see some remnants of this around here, but in the 1950s, the 1940s, when development pressures were really starting to get high with the baby boom and the recreation boom, people started doing stuff on lakes that was not really good for the health of the lake. They started, channeling out pieces of land because they're like, well, I have this much frontage now, but if I put in these really big channels, I could create dozens and dozens of lots here, and everybody would have lakeshore access. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but the water quality would just plummet down there, and you're going to have these little channels that are going to fill in with sediment. So you can find this, I think, down by Lodi. There's some areas on Lake Wisconsin, where they created these channel basis neighborhoods. And the state of Wisconsin still says, you know what, we learned a lesson there. That's not good for the lake, it's not good for the people of Wisconsin. So they still have a couple of staff people who are responsible for making sure that stuff like that doesn't happen on our lakes. We still put a bunch of money into management of fish in these lakes. So you'll see DNR staff always going around, not only managing for fish habitat and doing stocking of lakes with fish, but also just a whole regulatory program to make sure people are abiding by the rules and regulations that apply to fisheries. So that's all happening. So why should the property owner pay more? In my mind, being now a lakeshore property owner myself, I'd say the best argument is that the value of my asset now, the value of my house on the lake, is intimately and directly tied to the value of that lake itself. Yeah. That if that lake goes down in value, the value of my house and the value of my real estate goes down. If that lake gets better, my property values go up. Now I might complain about the taxes going up because of that, but nobody ever really complains about an appreciating asset, right? Nobody complains about, oh, my bank account doubled this year. What am I, who do I get mad at? So if your house is going up in value, you're thinking, this is a good sign. You don't want to be on a lake that's in sort of a death spiral. We actually see some places around the state where their property values are being suppressed because of the lake water quality. The best example I can point to is Tanner and Menomin Lake outside of Menominee in western Wisconsin. These two lakes have some of the worst algae blooms of any lake. Like if you think your lake water quality is bad now, go visit Tanner and Menomin in August and you'll find out just how bad it can get. It can get worse. And they did an economic study to figure out, well, let's look at real estate transactions. Let's look at how property values are faring on Tanner and Menomin, and let's compare it just to some other lakes in the region. And they found that there's millions of dollars in value that's just being left on the table because they're not able to turn around lake water quality. There was a study in northern Wisconsin, the Vilas County study.
Yeah, Violet's in
They start putting, basically, you can put a dollar figure on clarity. Most people shopping for lake property are really looking for how clear is the water, or how many days of the year does it have sort of this algae bloom. And so it really is intimately tied into that lake water quality. So if I have to chip in some money to try to protect it, that's sort of like paying my housing insurance. It's to protect the value of what I have right in front of me in terms of this lakeshore property. The other thing I'd say is that lake districts do give you some assurance as to, again, that money is not, there's, as Mike was kind of suggesting, there's not a lot of overhead in the lake districts. You're not hiring like a huge personnel department and a lot of bureaucracy. On the budgets that I've looked at for lake districts, 90% of it is going right into projects. To the extent that there's overhead, it has to do with sending out a mailing to everybody who lives in the district, right, who owns property in the district. So I mentioned that annual meeting that happens to set the budget. Lake districts are unique in that the notice for the annual meeting has to be physically mailed to every property owner in the district. So you can't say like, oh, I never heard that I didn't get the newspaper, so I must have missed the notice. You physically have to mail it. So someone say, well, that's kind of expensive. Yeah, there's a postage and printing cost associated with that. However, it's offset by the transparency that you get. The fact that, again, this meeting in the budget didn't get developed totally in a back room. Instead, it was shared with everyone ahead of time, and they all were invited to come to the meeting to talk about it. So that's the type of overhead cost you might have. But compared to, I think, like, I don't know, pick on school districts, but school districts are big enough that they have to have a bureaucracy to support the school district. Lake districts, I think you're going to find you have minimal bureaucracy. Points about money being raised. The other thing I guess I'd say is that it's capped. I think lake districts were the first units of government in the state of Wisconsin to have a revenue limit kind of imposed on them, and then it was built into Chapter 33 that said 2.5 mils is the most you can spend on the levy. And so it really can't get too out of control. You're not going to find like, oh, suddenly I'm paying thousands of dollars to the lake district. Right here.
When you talk about the cap, you take the lake district in the northern part of the state where they really have a high operating level, how much are they charging? Are they right up to the high limit?
I mean, the example that I gave of a lake like that was at,
St. Germain.
yeah, so their budget's at 250,000. I think they were actually, they were still below that.
That's a big lake with highly assessed property value. One of our members, Mike, from Bayside, has a place on Lake St. Germain. I was talking to him yesterday about it, how high the budget is, but still their fee is not that high for his property. It was less than $100, he said, for his property.
Okay.
I don't know if they do an assessment or what, but he said there's a lot of $1 million homes on that lake.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So really, the two biggest differences I pull out of the manual is on a lake district versus a qualified lake district versus the lake district versus the lake association is the ability to tax and fundraising, and the other one is able to write law on, because it's in that very own.
Yeah, the people of the lakes.
That's where I got that from.
So the ability to write law is really circumscribed.
Sure.
There's not a whole lot you can do. Like you don't,
You can write things like no wake zones and launch fees and what else? No wake after certain time. of
things
hours.
that impact the use of the actual lake.
Right.
But the Lake District would never, for example, get involved in shoreline zoning or
Well, that's
land
the
use.
two things, I just wanted to share, that's the two
Yep.
biggest things the differences of that, what it does.
Watercolors.
Everything else is stuff like fundraising, and everything else is cause and effect, so.
I'd say one slight difference that some lake districts have taken advantage of is that as a local unit of government, you can also borrow money from the state of Wisconsin if you needed to. And why would you need to? Well, let's say, again, 5 years from now, people say, well, we need an aquatic plant harvester, let's get into this. You'll find out they're not cheap to buy. And you'd say, well, wait a minute, why would we charge people just this year to buy an aquatic plant harvester that hopefully is gonna last at least 10 years, so you'd finance it. If you're a lake association getting that financing, it's not impossible, but it's a little more expensive and complicated.
Or you have a fundraiser like they do for an addition on a library or something else that they see.
Sure.
In almost every small town.
Sure,
We need a pool, let's have a fundraiser.
sure.
A big thermometer up there. I gotta go, I got my boy here.
Sure.
Thank you for coming in, I appreciate your time,
You bet.
both your time and your presentation. And I do research that material all the time, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Am I wrong too, in terms of the ordinance creation, like, a district has that power, but don't they have to be granted it by the town?
Yes, typically for most of any in-lake regulations, they would actually need sort of a blessing authorization from the town that encompasses the most, I think, of the lake.
Yeah.
It gets a little complicated because your lake, for example, does have multiple local units of government, so who gives the permission? And it's almost like for that reason why, in these cases, it's really hard, I think, for a district to take on those things. It would really only be for really obvious things, I think, that they would get into that. If all the towns in the county said, look, none of us want to be in the business of placing buoys. We know you want buoys out in the lake, but none of us want to do it. Then the Lake District might say, okay, we'll take this on, but we need to make sure that you give us formally the blessing to be the
We're
buoy.
doing that now, and we do have the blessings from the townships,
Yeah.
the right ordinances and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, so none of that changes too dramatically. Again, the idea with the district is that hopefully there's a little bit more assurance that it's gonna get done. Like, if the Lake Association says, you know what, this year nobody really wanted to do the buoy stuff, and so it's not gonna get done, and so some people are gonna run into things on the lake that they wouldn't have if we just had the buoys out. Hopefully, as a lake district, there's a little bit more durability and stability there, so it's like, no, we'll make sure the buoys get taken care of.
The town writes the ordinance for the buoy in this case, and majority of the townships have to approve it. So 3 of the 5 have to approve it, and for example, Fox Lake has to have it in their ordinances that this is a no-wake area or a rock area.
Yeah. Another example I want to give, I'm not trying to address his questions after he left, but there's a couple of instances around the state where, whether it's a lake association or a lake district, they look in the land around the lake and they're like, you know what, our life would be a lot better, we'd be more protected as a lake, if we would just purchase this 5-acre property or this 10-acre property. Maybe it's the source of a lot of sediment and runoff and it's being sold, like it's on the market, so it's like, you know what, let's just buy it, put it into a preserve and not have to worry about it. Or maybe it's a recreational access point that everybody appreciates and wants to kind of keep available forever. If you're a lake association and you buy land, you don't automatically become tax exempt with respect to that land. You have to go through a process, you have to actually demonstrate why you should have your property taxes exempted. If you're a lake district, like a school district, that property automatically becomes tax exempt. So why would this matter? Well, in the case of the lake association, if you went through a lot of work and fundraising and putting the thermometer out to buy this cool piece of property that's going to help protect water quality or protect spawning habitat for fish, and then you found out that because whatever reason your county doesn't want to give you tax exemption, now you've got to raise that money every year just to pay the property taxes on the property that you thought you were just protecting. And there's a lake association in Sawyer County, northern Wisconsin, that's in that exact situation. They purchased an island because they didn't want to see it get developed, and everybody appreciated this island's like right in the middle of the lake, and just in terms of scenic beauty and habitat, they just wanted to make sure that it didn't get developed. But ever since they purchased it, they've also been having to raise money to pay the property tax bill on it. And I contrast that to, I gave the example of Big Cedar Lake, not far from here. They have gone out and purchased a couple of small pieces of farmland. The land is actually still being farmed in some cases, but they put sideboards on it. They say, you can keep, we're gonna lease it out as farmland, but you can't, strip till it all the time and cause all these runoff problems. You just have to follow these practices. So they actually intervened in that market. And then there's a lake in central Wisconsin where we have a problem of high capacity wells being put into very sandy soils, pumping out water so fast and to such a degree that it actually lowers the lake level. And the Lake District said, well, here's this piece of farmland right across the road from the lake. We know that they want to put a well on it. Why don't we just buy the farmland, and then we'll just lease it out as farmland, with the only exception that you can't put a high cap well on it. So people still farm it, they're just not putting the well on it that would endanger the lake. So in those cases, there's some times, and lake districts have that power to purchase property and to get involved at that level. But boy, I'd hate to see a lake association then having to spend a lot of time and effort just raising money just to pay taxes on that property.
Good point.
Other questions, concerns, thoughts?
We got here a little bit, I'm sorry.
Sure.
What are we talking per year on a cottage or a house?
Association.
I'd imagine that Bill and Bill or somebody has kind of scoped out what your budget
Just
might look like.
ballpark, I have no idea.
Well, again, we always like to preface this with, it's up to the property owners. And we've put a couple budgets together, one we mailed out to you, and maybe there were some items in there, so we've done one recently that is more reflective. This is about $38,000. It talks about the programs, and then it talks about the cost of sending out mailings to the annual meeting and things like that. So if the district adopted that budget for that $38,000, and we did it by the fee basis, which divides by the property, then that would come down to about $37 per property. And that would be it. Now, if it goes to $60,000, it would be $60 per property, about, because we have 1,000 properties, or 1,100.
Okay, I understand, okay.
So, but as we talked earlier, maybe you weren't here, most lake districts are in the $100 or less range. Some of them are, in fact, the median was $12,500. I was a little surprised at that. So, and again, but it's up to the property owners, and depending upon what projects we have to do, and you'll notice in here where the projects that we're looking at would be we've got the carp gate operation, if that was in there for $3,000. We have aquatic invasive species management for $5,000. We can put in there our share for shoreline protection rehabilitation, $15,000. Now, all those line items would have to be approved by the property owners, but that's an example. We just
Okay,
want to show you
yeah, I just-
what it would be like.
I have no idea what you were doing.
we talked about earlier is that districts can, they can use, like the school district does, just a property levy that's based on value, but the statute also gives them the option of using something like a fee that isn't necessarily tied to value, but it still has to be somewhat related to, you know, how much are you raising, and does if the amount varies from property to property, is there a logical reason why it varies from property to property? So we talked about, for example, it's pretty common for a lakeshore property, it's right on a lake, to be charged sort of one fee higher than if you're a non-lakeshore property, but you're still in the district. It's like, well, yeah, they wouldn't pay the same rate. So you can even say, in your case, for example, it was $40 for lakeshore and $20 off.
You're looking at, no, we're looking at, for our district, only property on the lake.
So it's only property. So in that case, it's a certain amount on the lake and $0 if you're off the lake. Is how that works out.
Now, I know that comes back and haunts us too.
No, I get
because
it.
People say, I'm paying it, but the guy across the street's using the lake too.
Yeah.
And he or she is not, but
Right.
you gotta draw the line somewhere, and it's difficult enough to talk to the people that are on the lake to support it.
Right.
Now you get off the lake and they get less and less. I'm
Yep.
not on the lake because I didn't wanna be on the lake, now you're gonna tax me? I don't think so, like I said.
On the sheet, you're also keep in mind that it's only expenses, there's income from the ramp fees. So people from out of the area pay to put the boat in the lake,
Yeah.
not the city or Durkee Park
Good point.
ramps. You also have income from grants, from the state, from the county conservation grants, that is not reflected there. So that's only the expense portion that a district would require. So these other are incomes that are going against that.
And the other part that we mentioned earlier was that there's caps on that. Like there's a certain amount that you really just can't exceed, so it's built into the statute that governs the Lake District.
You know, one thing we talked about at the beginning that I don't think we've mentioned is we talked about how districts have a larger, it's easier for you to get recognized by other governments, so by your towns and your city. It's actually built into the leadership of the district that there has to be a representative from the county on the Board of Commissioners, and there has to be a representative from the largest municipality, so city, village, town, in the district, and that's probably complicated in here. But so your Board of Commissioners will always have some sort of local government representative that's able to report back. It's not always somebody from the county board. The county can appoint somebody to be there. Same thing with the local municipality, but there's at least supposed to be some level of communication between the local government and the district. You don't always get that from an association.
You might touch on, as long as you were there, that we can have 5 commissioners then, which would be 3, which would be elected by the property owners, and then 1 from the city and 1 from the county. But you could also have 5 elected and 1 from the city and 1 county. And that's up to the district, if they wanna do it.
Yeah, is the initial,
You just can't go backwards, if I remember right. If you go to 5, you can't go to 3.
right, yeah, so the total number of commissioners is either 5 or 7. And I don't know, I don't really have a sense of how that typically shakes out. I would guess that a larger district probably is more likely to go with the 7-member board than others, but I'm not sure.
I think it also depends on the, how to put it, the frequency with which the county board member actually comes to the meetings and how that might affect their ability to actually get things done. So sometimes those local governments don't always send their people, or that person doesn't show up. So then if the Lake District chooses, they're like, look, let's just make it so that there's 5 of us, so it's more likely that we have quorum at any given quarterly meeting,
Good point.
so we can just keep the ball moving forward, so that is part of it as well.
Quorum also brings up, I think, another point where if you're concerned about what the organization is doing, the district offers you, is that because it's a government agency, there's much more accountability and transparency. You have a right to get to records as a member of the district, which you may or may not even be able to get to some records if you're a member of the the association, but you certainly have very little right other than some very basic stuff, as a non-member of an association. So, it's easier to hold districts accountable, I guess, if you're a part of a district.
Yeah, so just like that annual meeting has to be noticed by a direct mailing to all the property owners in the district, the regular quarterly meetings have to be noticed just like a town board meeting. There has to be some public notification that this meeting's gonna happen. Now, if you have a good newsletter, there's also ways you can augment that just to make sure people know what's going on. But again, that is different than an association. If you're a lake association board, I think if they needed to call a meeting, next week, and they were gonna make some pretty critical decisions, there's no notice requirement. You don't have to let anybody know that that's actually happening. You just can do it. So that's the transparency, I think, that Mike is talking about, right?
We could spend our money on a cart fountain if we wanted to. We could put a really nice cart and have it be a fountain, and that's how we could spend the money we raised if we choose to.
Or you could do a really large ice sculpture
Yeah.
cart this
Yeah,
year
that-
and say that's what your money went for.
Yeah.
And then you can watch it melt. That's actually, so there's some other circuit breakers actually in here that reminded me of. Items in the budget that exceed $10,000 in this budget need to be itemized. So if your lake district spent $10,001 on an ice sculpture, and someone said, well, wait a minute, I don't remember seeing that in the budget. If they didn't itemize it out in the budget, then they did that illegally. So that's why they can't go forward and spend that type of money. So if it's over $10,000, it has to actually be itemized as an expenditure. There's also, if the lake district were to get in the business of some sort of, say they were gonna purchase gravel to put in a fish spawning bed, and the gravel itself is pretty generic, right? It's like, we just gotta buy a whole bunch of gravel, and if it exceeds a certain dollar amount, I wanna say it's only $5,000. There's a threshold at which, because you're a local unit of government, you actually have to put that out to bid. You're saying, we're gonna buy this gravel, so it can't be Bill's buddy happens to have a gravel pit, who's offering, a good price, to spend the Lake District money. You'd actually have to put that out to public bid. So those are other types of, really protections, I think, that end up being built into, this is something that's common to town governments and county governments and school districts, that we try to protect the taxpayer. Lake associations just don't have that necessarily built into them. We don't have a lot of good examples of lake districts that have wasted money or somehow lost money, but I'm sure it happens.
Well, thank you very much. Both of you, we're gonna
Yeah, we can all stick
certainly
around.
ask questions or
I can answer questions one-on-one.
individually or whatever you would like to do.
Yeah, I'll just stay right here.
Those of you
If
that,
anybody'd like to sign a petition, we have them here.
where we are right now is, I don't have the exact count, maybe Karen can give it to me, I just gave her one more, so we're at
606.
606, okay? And we really need to get around 720 or thereabouts or even higher, so we're about 104 short right now, 114 short. And we're working very closely with everybody. We've got a lot of neighborhood volunteers here, David's here, and all of us have been working hard in our areas. So if you haven't signed and we've answered your questions, hopefully, we appreciate signatures because we wanna try to get this done. We've been working on it now for about 5 months. And again, we're all volunteers, so it's not that we've been trying to spend every hour of every day with it. We're still trying to run the lake with the Lake Association and doing this as an extra project. But the board is very dedicated to it. Eric came up here, I just realized in 2016 already, with the first presentation to the board, we studied it thoroughly to make sure it was the right thing for our lake. And we felt it was right, and we said, okay, let's go and let's launch it and let's try to get it done. So with that, we've been doing our best with these open meetings, and then we brought in Eric today, and we invited we still have about 400 people that have not made a commitment, and those are the ones we invited. We certainly appreciate your coming. We would like to have had about 200 more here, but, we'll continue to work with him.